2 new, allegedly true Dogman stories. Beginning with Dogman versus Kushtaka, Alaskan cryptid fistfight. Dear Scary Stories NYC, I am one of those rare lucky individuals who had gotten to witness a dogman in action and lived to tell the tale. But my experience was an especially emotional one because the arrival of the dogman meant I had a chance to escape the creature men holding me captive. Some call them the Watsa, some call them the Oriuli or the Natina, but my grandma warned me about them using the name Kushtaka. Some people say that Kushtaka is a second kind of Bigfoot that lives in the wilderness in Alaska. While I have no argument with that description, I would note that the Kushtaka is a clawed and fanged beast, in many ways more similar to the Dogman than the Sasquatch. Of course, I would make that comparison, since I saw one of them battling the other. I understand that your audience is largely in the States and the UK, and that some of them have only begun to become familiar with the Kushtaka in the past few years. This is a kind of animal that you're really only going to encounter in some few areas on the planet, so don't expect them to become a problem for most people. But if you decide to venture out into their territory, then you're asking for trouble from one of the potentially fiercest creatures on land or in water. I was once at a class reunion, talking to a guy I was friends with in high school. I was telling him about the Kushtaka, saying that it was the scariest creature I ever saw. When he asked me what a Kushtaka was, and I said it was an otter that stood like a man. Well, he burst out laughing, and he didn't want to hear the rest of my story. Then later, he rudely interrupted me talking to others to ask if I'd told my giant otter man story yet. For people who think otters are cute, the idea of a giant otter man seems humorous. If you're alone in the wilderness and you wander onto Kushtaka turf, however, you're not going to feel very much like laughing. So this is a dogman story ultimately, but to me, the dogman is not and can never be as frightening as the Kushtaka. Sure, the dogman is fiercer, it's wilder, it's more dangerous, but the thing is, dogmen prefer to eat otters over eating humans. I learned this firsthand, and I'll get to that part in a little while. I went hiking in the Kluane National Park back in the early days of commercially available GPS devices. I don't remember the exact year, but I'm going to narrow it down to 2003 or 2004. Those were my lost years after my divorce, when I felt my lowest, and so I just sort of walked off into the wilderness. I was at that kind of a stage in life where I wanted to jump off the roof. So, walking through a snowstorm in the middle of Alaska seemed logical. I mean, why not? I literally had nothing left to lose. Since my wife had left me for my best friend, and all my other friends sided with those two, I also welcomed the solitude of Alaska. I had to work for a while to get all their insulting and negative voices out of my head. But at least up there in the middle of nowhere, I wasn't adding any more hurtful voices to the mix. There are reasons that yogis meditate on mountaintops and not at home with their unsatisfied wives. To put it another way, Baba Ram Dass once said, "If you think you're so spiritual, try moving home with your parents for 2 weeks." So I was wandering alone in the snow for quite some time, beginning to enjoy life again, when a lone figure approached me in the snow, hailing me down. I really wanted to give him the silent treatment, but he began the conversation in a friendly manner. "Ho, friend, there is no need for you to travel further in this direction." I wondered what the hell that was supposed to mean, and I shot him an annoyed glance. It was then that I realized I recognized his face, but I couldn't quite place it. It was an older man, and I could swear we'd met before. "Friend, friend," he called out to me. "Surely there is need of you elsewhere, can that not be so?" Who speaks like that, I wondered. This guy was annoying. I told him I didn't understand what he was saying, and I brushed past him, moving deeper into what was becoming a winter storm. That guy looked so familiar. Even after our meeting, I kept trying to place his face. And then, my GPS started sending me gibberish that made no sense. I knew I couldn't trust it, but I wasn't sure what was causing the trouble, or which way to turn to fix my problem. The cloud cover must have been to blame somehow. It was too heavy for me to see stars in the night, and so I was going to have to wait for the sun to come up and hope I could discern east through the thick cloud cover. At that point, when morning came, I could at least regain my bearings. I was looking for a spot to set up camp for the night when I saw the first two Kushtaka sitting on some rocks up ahead to my right. They were huddled together for warmth and watching me, while sitting there perfectly still. I was walking into their land without realizing it. I stopped moving forward and stared back for a while. Then I turned slowly, with the intent of walking back the way I came. It was too late, though. Kushtaka were both ahead of and behind me. I was already in their land. That man who had approached me in the snow, I now remembered the face. It was my ex-wife's grandfather. I had only met him one time before That wasn't my wife's grandfather. He passed away before I went on this trip. That was a Kushtaka that told me to turn back. They can take other forms, you know. Even I knew that, and yet I forgot it in my self-pity. He had asked me not to come here, and yet there I was. I wanted to leave, but this very large otter-headed man kind of herded me forward, and I walked deeper and deeper into the land that I had been asked not to enter in the first place. I tried to remember the stories of the Kushtaka. Sometimes when you were lost, they guided you to safety. Maybe that was why I was being herded forward. Of course, in other stories, they led you into their settlement in order to trap and eat you. Oh wait, there was also a story my grandmother told me that the Kushtaka will bring you into their village, and then you will become one of them. Had I left humanity only to become one of these animal men? Was this to be my fate? Might I even be better off there? But I felt it was wrong to allow them to herd me against my will, whether their intentions were good or not. I didn't want to end up being their meal, but I didn't want to end up being one of the otter people either. I began to look around and become anxious to find a way to break free of this apparent captivity that I was walking myself right into. Suddenly, one of the Kushtaka men pushing me forward ran ahead of me, and others were running ahead too, staring at some kind of commotion. Soon all of the Kushtaka were ignoring me. This was because both they and I were staring in amazement, as the largest of all the Kushtaka was facing off against an immense gray wolf who stood upright like a man. At first I rushed forward, wanting to see the Dogman in detail. He was engaged in a savage battle with a rather long-snouted, almost bear-like otterman who was holding an old warped and battered wooden oar and using it mostly in defense to block the Dogman's attacks. The large, gray, wolf-headed man would lunge at the upright otter's exposed soft underbelly, and the Kushtaka would counter with the handle of the oar, leaving that Dogman biting nothing but wood. Occasionally, the brown and semi-aquatic cryptid would get a little slap in here or there, but the far more aggressive and desperate Dogman was scoring more often with his slashing claw attacks. The crowd of Kushtaka closed in around the fighting. I saw the Dogman was gonna do his opponent in if he was allowed to finish what he'd started. I wondered if the crowd would allow that to happen. Whether the Dogman won his fight or not, would the crowd allow him to escape? I don't know what proper Kushtaka etiquette is. More and more of the otter people began to join the crowd, nearly all of them taller than I am. I began to allow them in front of me. Then I began to move backward in the crowd, slowly, but deliberately. Soon I was past the main part of them, and I realized I could make a break for it. Into the nearby trees I ran, trying to keep the fight in view and run away from it. I no longer cared east, west, north, or south. I only cared about away. Once I was past the main crowd, I was surprised to see another gray dogman facing off against an otterman in the woods. And that otterman didn't see it. But at least two other wolf-headed dogmen were creeping up right behind him. I think the village of the Kushtakas might be under siege or attack from the dogmen. Then again, the handful I saw might have been the entirety of the attack. I would say that each individual dogman would be a superior fighter to each Kushtaka, but I had seen the Kushtaka use that old oar like a martial arts weapon, so they might be very intelligent creatures. We were also on their turf, and they seemed pretty organized while at home. Canines tend to work in packs, though, and I wondered who was going to win that skirmish. For me personally, the only win was going to be getting out of those woods alive, though, and so I kept my distance from any moving figures and stayed focused on getting away and becoming alone again. When the woods ended, I found a stream or river and decided to walk along it. Almost immediately, behind me, I heard the sound of movement. When I turned and looked, there was a Kushtaka staring at me, a young and wily-looking one. He stood on a rock by the water. I was close enough to see the look on his face, and it seemed that he was thinking about something. His body was tense, and his face was serious. And then, all at once, he loosened and ran into the woods that I had just run out of. Was he going to tell the others? Or maybe he was running back to rejoin the battle against the dogmen. Maybe he decided my getting away wasn't so important, relatively speaking. Maybe I was free. Or maybe I was about to get chased down by those creatures instead. Well, I couldn't run. I was too loaded down to run. I walked purposefully, as quickly as I could, and that was about all I could do. If the Kushtaka came back from me, they might get me. But I still didn't really even know if that would be good or bad for me in the long run anyway. Maybe I would like the life of a Kushtaka. Then again, if they were just gonna eat me, then I would rather continue straying in the wilderness as a human. It ended up being a moot point, as I wandered until I was exhausted and barely set up camp before passing out. When I woke up, my GPS was working fine, and the entire thing just felt like one of those strange and inexplicable Alaska dreams. But was it a dream? Or was it real? How do you even define either in that place? I have to admit that even though I was born in Alaska, I will never understand my homeland. But I am grateful that I got to survive witnessing Dogman versus Kushtaka. The Dogman led me to safety. Dear Scary Stories NYC, I am one of your female viewers, but this is my first time sending you an email. My story happened to me in western Pennsylvania when I was stupid enough to join my ex-boyfriend visiting his parents. I didn't realize what lowlives those people were, but it turned out to be a lucky thing I found out when I did. I had been considering moving in with this guy, and that would have turned out to be a huge disaster. Ironically, the best person in the story I'm about to tell you wasn't even a person. It was the Dogman, who seriously might have saved my life. Now, I'm not going to mention the name of the area we were in, because I don't want those people coming after me. There were houses there that looked like they were condemned, but you could tell by the recentness of the garbage blowing down the block that people were still living in those crumbling old structures. It felt like we were in Deliverance or a Texas Chainsaw Massacre, even though we were in the Northeast. I thought I was an atheist until my ex-boyfriend drove me to his parents' neighborhood by the woods. I started praying to God inside my head so fervently that I knew my faith had never truly subsided. I prayed that I would get home safely and that I would be able to break up with this guy in such a manner that he wouldn't go psycho on me and become a stalker. Meanwhile, I looked over at him driving us, and he never looked happier. He looked downright proud to be bringing me home to his parents. When we went inside the house he grew up in, the place smelled like death. I choked upon entering, and he criticized me for being rude. I couldn't understand his parents when they talked. I don't even know what their accents were. His mother tried to get me to behead a chicken for dinner, and I went out back to keep from getting ill. My ex came out to yell at me for being rude to his mother, and I just let him rant until he was done. Then, when he went back inside, I made a break for the woods. I didn't know where I was going, but I wasn't going back to that place. I ran as hard as I could until my side ached, and I had to slow down. I walked and walked through those woods, following a path at first, but it didn't seem to lead anywhere. Soon I was just squeezing between trees and bushes. I was picking ticks off of myself too. It was not fun. My phone started blowing up with my ex calling me and texting, but I didn't need to look at any of that. I just needed to follow this wood until it let out, and then I was going to need to find myself some transportation. After a while of walking and finding nothing but more forest, I started making finding some food my top priority instead. Then, it got darker. Then it got colder. Now I wasn't sure what my priorities even were anymore. Well, you know how this story ends. I don't freeze, and I don't starve to death. I get rescued by a big, friendly, furry giant who trotted up to me down on all fours, wagging his tail and acting like we were old friends reuniting. I greeted him warmly and pat him on the head. He was so happy about that he jumped on top of me, and we both tumbled backward, laughing. He licked me all over my face, and I couldn't stop giggling. But then, that big old canine stood up on his hind legs, like a man, and he offered me one of his paws, as though he wanted to pull me up to my feet. I screamed, and I backed away on the ground. It was like someone had taken a 3D dog model and run a human animation on it. It was very uncanny valley to me. But I don't mean it seemed artificial. I mean it looked like he was moving just as a human would move. When he saw that I was scared of him looking that way, he dropped back down onto all fours. But the damage had been done. I knew he wasn't a dog at all. He was the Pennsylvania Dogman that my ex-boyfriend had told me stories about. None of the stories were good, and none involved the Dogman being nice or licking you on your face. I suddenly wondered if maybe he was only tasting me, not kissing me. This immense creature made itself small and whimpered. I got up and walked away from it, and it trailed behind me, whining softly. After a while, it stopped whining and just followed me. But when we reached a certain area, where the trees bunched up in a peculiar way, the dog leaped in front of me and made it clear he did not want me to pass. When I persisted, he stood up to his full height again, which was as tall as a tall man. He was quite intimidating when he wanted to be, and so I backed away. As I did so, there came a long, low moaning from those woods ahead of us. I don't know what I heard making that moan, but it was not something small. I shuddered, and I could swear I saw the Dogman doing the same. Soon he was walking upright and allowing me to lean on him, as I was so tired, and my legs and feet were aching. I remember stumbling and hitting my knees pretty hard as I came down. I remember waking up and being carried by that Dogman, and I remember calling him Good Boy in my delirium. I also don't know if I dreamed it, but I do have this memory of the two of us telling each other that we both had the utmost respect for each other. I giggle thinking about it. I mean, I must have been hallucinating by that point, right? I woke up leaning against a wall outside a building. There was a police officer watching me, with a kind of a smirk on his face. I looked around and the Dogman was gone. I was extremely disoriented, and this made the officer laugh. "Have a good nap?" he asked me, and I knew he thought I was some kind of druggie. "This isn't what it looks like," I told him. "What does it look like?" he asked me. "I just escaped my scary boyfriend and his family running through the woods," I told him. And the cop told me, yep, that was exactly what it looked like. Anyway, that cop and I are still Facebook friends. He helped me out a lot that day. The ex-boyfriend and his inbred relatives, however, they are all blocked. I tell you one guy I wish I could add to my friends list, though. And that's the Dogman who led me out of those woods, no matter how much of a pain I got to be. Because I wouldn't be alive and kicking and telling you this story if it hadn't happened that Dogman led me to safety. If you ask me who's today's executive producer, I would tell you that. He's a winner, not a loser, and his name is Matt. Please join me in thanking Matthew Frederick for making this episode possible. Matthew is one of our top-tier PayPal Club members. He gets cool perks, like our secret uncensored stories and our over 25 hours of archived secret stories too. Yes, you can access all that without having to pay YouTube, although I don't suppose PayPal's any better. Here to fill in the deets on how you can help us survive what looks like it's gonna be another hard year, may I present our international TV spokesmongrel, Henry Lee Dogman. Hank? Thanks, Biggie, and thanks to all of you for watching this far. If you liked it, please click like. If you'd like to see more of our work, please subscribe. And also click that bell icon if you'd like to be notified when we put out a new episode. To become an executive producer, you can donate to us through the thanks button under each of our videos or through our paypal.me/PeterBernard209 page. To receive cool perks like secret uncensored Dogman episodes far too wild to ever run on this channel, you can become a YouTube channel member by clicking the join button, or join our PayPal subscribers club at peterbernard.com. Joining either at the $3 a month level or above gets you access to our over 25 hours of secret uncensored Dogman stories available nowhere else. Do you have a scary story about Dogman or some other kind of high strangeness that happened to you? Let us know by emailing us at scarystoriesnyc@gmail.com or by leaving us a voicemail message at 804-LA-SCARY. You may need to call back on that one. It cuts off after, I think, 3 minutes. And if you don't want to do any of that stuff, thank you for simply watching to the end. Good night, and have a scary tomorrow.
Come back for more scary stories.